what can we do but help each other, help humanity? The earth is full of everything. So how can...
She was called the most dangerous woman in America. The FBI pursued her for decades. Her phones were tapped, her letters intercepted, and J. Edgar Hoover personally ordered infiltrated agents to watch her every show. Are you enjoying this story about Mahalia Jackson? Then this is the moment to help keep stories like this alive. We're so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your support right now truly makes a difference. Here's something important. 94.8% of the people watching these videos are not subscribed yet. If you're one of them, take just 1 second and subscribe. It's free, it means a lot, and it helps this channel grow so we can keep bringing you the timeless stories of the TV shows and legends we still miss. Let's hit this goal together this year. And don't forget, at the end of the video, there are more stories waiting for you. Thank you for being here. But Josephine Baker wasn't a criminal. She was a dancer, and her most powerful weapon wasn't a pistol. It was her body, her intelligence, and a courage that defied Nazis, racists, and dictators. How did a black girl born in a St. Louis shack become a French resistance spy, Europe's sex symbol, mother of 12 children from different races, and the first black American woman to be buried with military honors in the Pantheon of Paris? And why, despite all this, did she die practically bankrupt, expelled from the dream house she built in France? But before we uncover the triumphs and tragedies of her extraordinary life, we need to understand where it all began, in the darkest corners of America, where a child learned that survival meant performing even when your heart was breaking. This is the story of Josephine Baker, a life so extraordinary it seems impossible, but every word is true. Born Frida Josephine MacDonald on June 3, 1906, she came into the world amid absolute poverty in St. Louis, Missouri, a city that would soon become infamous for one of the worst race riots in American history. Her mother, Carrie MacDonald, was a washerwoman who scrubbed other people's clothes until her hands bled. And her father, Eddie Carson, was a vaudeville drummer who abandoned the family before Josephine could even form memories of him. Her mother later married Arthur Martin, a kind but struggling man who worked whatever jobs he could find. But kindness didn't fill empty stomachs or keep out the winter cold. They lived in a neighborhood called the Chestnut Valley, where houses were little more than shacks without adequate plumbing. Electricity was a luxury most couldn't afford, and in winter the cold pierced through the thin walls as if they were paper. Josephine slept on the floor with her siblings, sometimes 4 or 5 children huddled together under whatever blankets and coats they could pile on top of each other. She spent her childhood barefoot even in snow, wearing clothes mended so many times you could barely recognize the original fabric. And many nights she went to bed with her stomach growling from hunger, dreaming of the meals she saw white children eating through restaurant windows. At 8 years old, her mother made a decision that would scar Josephine forever. She sent her to work as a domestic servant for a wealthy white family, the Kaisers, who needed someone to clean, cook, and care for their children. Josephine was paid just a few dollars a week, money she had to send directly home, and she slept in the basement on a mat, separate from the family she served. The mistress, Mrs. Kaiser, was cruel in ways that seemed designed to break a child's spirit. She criticized everything Josephine did, called her stupid and lazy, and one day, when Josephine used too much soap washing dishes, Mrs. Kaiser grabbed her small hand and plunged it into a pot of boiling water, holding it there while Josephine screamed. The burns left scars she would carry for the rest of her life, physical reminders that in America, a black child's pain meant nothing to those in power. But Mrs. Kaiser taught Josephine something else too, something she didn't intend. She taught her that white people's power came from performance, from acting like they were better, more deserving, more human. And if power came from performance, Josephine realized, then she could perform too. She could put on a mask, play a role, become whoever she needed to be to survive. After months of abuse, Josephine ran away from the Kaiser household and returned to her mother's home, but there was barely enough food for the family already there. She tried working at other houses, but each experience was similar. White families who treated her like property, who thought nothing of hitting her, starving her, or working her until she collapsed. So Josephine turned to the streets. On the corners of St. Louis, she began dancing for coins, and this is where she discovered her genius. She would make exaggerated faces, cross her eyes, stick out her tongue, contort her body in ways that made people laugh. She played the fool, the clown, and crowds loved it. They threw pennies, nickels, sometimes quarters, and Josephine would scoop them up and run home before anyone could take them from her. She was performing poverty, turning her degradation into entertainment. And she hated it even as she perfected it, but she also realized something powerful. When she danced, she controlled the room. When she made people laugh, they forgot she was just a hungry black child. They saw a performer, an entertainer, someone with value. When Josephine turned 13, everything in her life accelerated. She met a man named Willie Wells, who was kind to her, bought her a meal, told her she was pretty, and she married him within weeks because marriage meant escape. It meant having someone to protect her. But Willie Wells was a boy himself, barely older than Josephine, with no money and no prospects, and the marriage crumbled within months. Josephine realized she had traded one form of poverty for another, and worse, she had lost her freedom. She divorced him and almost immediately married another man, Willie Baker, whose last name she would keep for the rest of her life, even though the marriage lasted barely longer than the first. Willie Baker worked on the railroad and was gone for weeks at a time, and Josephine realized she didn't want a husband, she wanted a way out, and that way out was dancing. She began performing in small clubs, doing the same comedy routines that had earned her pennies on the street, but now on actual stages. She joined traveling shows that moved through black communities in the South, performing in church basements and dance halls, sleeping in cars, or on the floors of sympathetic families. The work was brutal. The pay was almost nothing. But Josephine was learning the craft, studying every performer she saw, absorbing their timing, their presence, their techniques. And she had something none of them had, a kind of wild, untamed energy that couldn't be taught. When Josephine danced, she didn't just move her body, she threw her entire soul into the performance, her eyes wide, her movements sharp and unpredictable, her smile manic. Audiences didn't know whether to be entertained or frightened, and that tension made her unforgettable. Her big break came in 1921, when she auditioned for Shuffle Along, a musical written and performed entirely by black artists that was taking New York by storm. The show was revolutionary for its time, proving that black performers could create sophisticated, successful theater without relying on minstrel stereotypes. But when Josephine showed up to audition, the producers took one look at her and said no. She was too young, only 15, and worse, she was too dark. The show wanted light-skinned black women for the chorus line, and Josephine's dark skin didn't fit their vision of what would appeal to white audiences. Josephine begged, pleaded, told them she would work for almost nothing, and finally they agreed to let her be an understudy, someone who would only perform if another dancer got sick or injured. She was placed at the very end of the chorus line, where audiences would barely notice her, and told to blend in and not cause trouble. But Josephine Baker had never blended in a day in her life. During performances, while the other dancers did their synchronized routines, Josephine would deliberately mess up, crossing her eyes, dancing out of step, making ridiculous faces, and the audience started noticing. At first, the directors were furious, threatening to fire her, but then they saw what was happening. People weren't watching the leads anymore. They were watching the crazy girl at the end of the line, and they were loving it. Within weeks, Josephine went from understudy to featured performer, and critics started mentioning her by name. She had turned her exclusion into her strength, used her position at the margins to steal the spotlight, and it was a strategy she would deploy again and again throughout her life. If you wouldn't let her be the star they wanted, she'd become the star nobody expected. Her success in Shuffle Along led to other shows, and by 1925, Josephine was performing in The Chocolate Dandies, another black musical, when she caught the attention of Carolyn Dudley Reagan, a wealthy white American woman who was putting together a revue to take to Paris. Reagan was looking for black performers to present what she called authentic Negro entertainment to European audiences, and she saw Josephine as the perfect savage, exotic, and untamed. Josephine knew exactly how Reagan saw her, knew she was being cast as a caricature, but she also saw an opportunity. America had never given her anything but pain, and now someone was offering her a ticket to Europe, to a place she'd heard treated black performers with respect, even adoration. She accepted immediately. In October 1925, Josephine Baker arrived in Paris with La Revue Nègre, and within weeks she became the most talked-about performer in the city. Her debut performance at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées was unlike anything Parisian audiences had ever seen. She came on stage wearing almost nothing, just a few feathers and beads, dancing with movements that were wild, sexual, and utterly uninhibited. She writhed, she crawled, she moved her body in ways that shocked and mesmerized. Then came her signature moment. She appeared wearing nothing but a skirt made of artificial bananas, dancing the danse sauvage with her partner Joe Alex, and Paris lost its mind. The performance was scandalous. Critics called it primitive and barbaric, but they couldn't look away. Overnight, Josephine became the symbol of everything Paris wanted in the 1920s: liberation, sexuality, freedom from Victorian restraint. She was invited to every fashionable party, painted by famous artists, photographed constantly. Picasso made cubist sketches of her, Ernest Hemingway wrote about her in his letters, and F. Scott Fitzgerald called her the most sensational woman anyone ever saw. But here's what people didn't understand about Josephine Baker's success. She wasn't just performing primitivism, she was controlling it, manipulating it, using white fascination with black exoticism to gain power and wealth. She knew exactly what she was doing. When she crossed her eyes or wore that banana skirt, she was giving them what they expected, while simultaneously mocking their expectations. She once said, "I wasn't really naked, I simply didn't have any clothes on," a statement that perfectly captured her understanding of performance as armor. She let them think they were consuming her, when really she was consuming them, their money, their attention, their power. Within a year, Josephine was the highest-paid entertainer in Europe. She performed at the famous Folies Bergère, where she descended from the ceiling on a mirror ball wearing diamonds and feathers, commanding fees that male performers envied. She opened her own nightclub, Chez Josephine, where she would finish her stage performances and then rush to her club to sing for intimate crowds until dawn. She bought expensive clothes, jewelry, cars, and famously, she had a pet cheetah named Chiquita that she would walk on a leash through Paris wearing a diamond collar. The cheetah became part of her brand, and newspapers loved photographing her with the animal, reinforcing the idea that Josephine herself was wild and untamed. But behind the glamour and excess, Josephine was calculating every move. She hired managers, invested in property, and began building a fortune. She also began educating herself, studying French until she spoke it fluently, reading literature and philosophy, taking voice lessons to improve her singing. The woman who had barely attended school in St. Louis was transforming herself into a sophisticated artist, but she never forgot where she came from or what America had done to her. In 1936, Josephine decided to return to the United States for a major tour, believing that her European success would finally earn her respect in her home country. She was devastatingly wrong. The Ziegfeld Follies hired her for their new show, offering her top billing and an enormous salary, but American audiences didn't know what to do with her. White critics called her performances grotesque and uncivilized. Black critics accused her of perpetuating stereotypes, and the show was a disaster. Worse, when she traveled through the South, she faced the full brutality of Jim Crow segregation. Hotels refused her service, restaurants made her use back entrances, and in several cities, theaters cancelled her performances rather than allow a black woman on their stages. One night in St. Louis, her hometown, she tried to eat at a restaurant and was told to leave. She was an international star, wealthy beyond anything her childhood self could have imagined. But in America, she was still just a black woman. And that meant she was nobody. The rejection broke something in Josephine, or maybe it clarified something she had always known. In 1937, she married Jean Lyon, a wealthy Jewish industrialist, and through the marriage, she became a French citizen. She renounced her American citizenship, a radical act for any American, but especially for a black woman. America had rejected her at every turn, burned her hands, starved her, tried to break her spirit, and now she was rejecting America. France, she declared, was her true home, the only place that had ever treated her with dignity. She would prove that declaration in ways nobody could have predicted. When World War II began and Nazi Germany invaded France in 1940, Josephine Baker had every reason to flee. She was wealthy, famous, and could have easily escaped to safety in South America or England. Instead, she volunteered for French military intelligence. Jacques Abté, an officer in French counterintelligence, recruited her as a spy, and Josephine threw herself into the work with the same intensity she brought to everything. Her role was perfect because it was so unlikely. Who would suspect a famous entertainer of being a spy? She used her celebrity as cover, attending parties and receptions held by Nazi and Italian officials, flirting with enemy officers, laughing at their jokes, all while memorizing conversations and gathering intelligence. She would write down what she learned using invisible ink on her sheet music, knowing border guards would never suspect musical notation of containing military secrets. She smuggled photos of German installations by pinning them inside her underwear, correctly betting that male officers would be too embarrassed to search her thoroughly. She carried messages for the French resistance hidden in her brasiers and once smuggled vital documents across borders inside a hollowed-out book. Are you enjoying this story about Mahalia Jackson? Then this is the moment to help keep stories like this alive. We're so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your support right now truly makes a difference. Here's something important. 94.8% of the people watching these videos are not subscribed yet. If you're one of them, take just 1 second and subscribe. It's free, it means a lot, and it helps this channel grow so we can keep bringing you the timeless stories of the TV shows and legends we still miss. Let's hit this goal together this year. And don't forget, at the end of the video, there are more stories waiting for you. Thank you for being here. Josephine traveled constantly during the war, performing in North Africa and the Middle East, using her concerts as cover for intelligence missions. She visited French colonies in Morocco and Algeria, where she gathered information and raised morale among French troops. She contracted life-threatening illnesses during these tours, including a severe bout of peritonitis that nearly killed her, and she spent 18 months in a Moroccan hospital recovering. Even from her sickbed, she continued working for French intelligence, allowing her hospital room to be used as a meeting place for resistance fighters. After the war ended, the French government awarded her the Croix de Guerre and the Rosette de la Résistance, and in 1961 she received the Légion d'honneur with the rank of Chevalier, France's highest honor. She was a genuine war hero, but most Americans never knew about it, and those who did rarely acknowledged it. When the war ended, Josephine returned to performing, but now with a new mission. She had fought Nazis and survived, and now she would fight American racism with the same ferocity. In 1951, she embarked on a tour of the United States, but this time she included a clause in every contract that stated she would not perform at any venue that practiced racial segregation. This was unprecedented. Most black performers, even famous ones, accepted segregated audiences because refusing meant not working at all. But Josephine had French citizenship and European fame. She didn't need America the way other performers did, and she used that freedom as a weapon. The most famous incident occurred at the Stork Club in New York, one of the most exclusive and fashionable nightclubs in America. Josephine arrived with a party that included a white friend, and they were seated, but then the service stopped. No one would take their order, bring them drinks, or acknowledge them. They sat there for over an hour while other tables, white tables, were served promptly. Josephine realized what was happening and erupted. She stood up and announced loudly that the Stork Club was refusing her service because she was black, and the incident made headlines. Walter Winchell, a powerful gossip columnist who was at the club that night, claimed he didn't see any discrimination, but others confirmed Josephine's account. She filed complaints with several organizations, and the NAACP supported her, and suddenly the Stork Club incident became a national scandal about racism in America's most glamorous spaces. Josephine didn't stop there. She became close friends with the NAACP leadership and began working actively in the civil rights movement. In 1963, she was invited to speak at the March on Washington, the massive demonstration where Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Josephine was the only official woman speaker that day, and she appeared on stage wearing her old Free French uniform covered in military medals, a visual reminder that she had risked her life for freedom before. She spoke about her life, about being rejected in America and embraced in France, and she challenged the crowd to continue fighting. She said, "You are on the eve of a complete victory. You can't go wrong. The world is behind you." Her presence that day was symbolic, proof that the fight for black freedom was international, that racism was America's shame, not just domestically, but globally. But perhaps Josephine's most radical act came in the form of adoption. Starting in 1954, she began adopting children from around the world, eventually collecting 12 children of different races, religions, and nationalities. She called them her Rainbow Tribe, and her vision was both beautiful and naive. She wanted to prove that racism was learned, not innate, that children of all backgrounds could live together as siblings and love each other. She adopted Akio from Korea and Jeannot from Japan, Luis from Colombia and Shari from Finland, Jean-Claude and Moïse from France, Brahim and Marianne from Algeria, Kofi from Ivory Coast, Mara from Venezuela, Noel from France, and Stelina from Morocco. She raised them all at Château de Milande, a massive castle she purchased in the Dordogne region of France, converting it into a kind of experimental utopia. The castle became a tourist attraction. Josephine opened it to the public, charging admission, and thousands of visitors came every year to see the Rainbow Tribe, to watch these children from different continents playing together, eating together, studying together. Josephine gave tours herself, explaining her philosophy that if children could be raised without prejudice, they would grow up to change the world. She installed a small museum about her life in one wing of the castle and restaurants and gift shops in others. She employed dozens of staff members, gardeners, cooks, nannies, tutors, and security guards. She wanted the castle to be completely self-sufficient, a model for how the world could be. But the financial reality was unsustainable. Running a castle, raising 12 children, employing a huge staff, and maintaining tourist facilities cost a fortune. And even though Josephine was still performing and earning good money, it wasn't enough. She had invested everything into Château de Milande, mortgaging and remortgaging the property, borrowing from friends and banks, always believing the next concert tour or the next business venture would solve everything. She opened a restaurant in Paris that failed, invested in real estate that lost value, and poured money into causes and charities without ever checking if she could afford it. Her accountants begged her to cut costs, but Josephine refused to compromise on her vision. The Rainbow Tribe needed the castle, she insisted. It was proof of her ideals, and she would find a way to keep it. By the mid-1960s, the debts became crushing. Banks began foreclosure proceedings, and Josephine fought them desperately. She sold jewelry, cars, furniture, anything she could liquidate, but it was never enough. In 1969, French authorities finally forced the issue. They scheduled an auction to sell the castle and ordered Josephine to vacate. She refused. On the day bailiffs arrived to remove her, Josephine locked herself inside the kitchen and refused to come out. When they finally broke in, they found her lying on the floor, suffering from what appeared to be a nervous breakdown, dehydrated and weak from not eating. The images of Josephine Baker, the great star and war hero, being carried unconscious from her castle shocked France and the world. Here was a woman who had fought Nazis and stood up to American racism, reduced to this humiliation over money. Princess Grace of Monaco, the American actress Grace Kelly, who had married into European royalty, heard about Josephine's situation and intervened. She offered Josephine a villa in Roquebrune-Cap-Martin in Monaco, where she and the children could live rent-free. It was a kind gesture, but also a painful one. Josephine went from owning a castle to being charity case, dependent on the generosity of others. The children, now teenagers, struggled with the transition. Some acted out, some became withdrawn. All of them had to process that the grand experiment their mother had promised them was over. But even in her late 60s, sick, exhausted and financially destroyed, Josephine Baker refused to quit. She needed money to support her children, and the only way she knew how to earn money was performing. In 1973, she began planning a comeback show in Paris, a retrospective celebrating 50 years in show business. She worked with producers to create an elaborate production featuring songs, stories, and costume changes that would trace her entire career. The show was called Josephine and was scheduled to open at the Bobino Theatre in Paris in April 1975. Many people doubted it would work. Josephine was 68 years old, had suffered multiple health crises, and hadn't had a major hit in years. Who would buy tickets to see an aging performer relive past glories? Everyone, it turned out. When tickets went on sale, they sold out almost immediately. The opening night on April 8, 1975, was a triumphant celebration. The theatre was packed with celebrities, politicians, former colleagues, and fans who had followed her for decades. Josephine performed for over 2 hours, singing her classic songs, telling stories, and displaying the energy and charisma that had made her famous half a century earlier. The audience gave her multiple standing ovations, and critics wrote reviews calling her a legend, an icon, and proof that true stars never fade. Josephine read those reviews in her apartment the next morning and wept with joy. She had done it. She had proven she was still relevant, still powerful, still Josephine Baker. The show was scheduled to run for months, and finally, after years of financial disaster, it looked like she would have stability again, income again, maybe even enough to help her children build their own lives. 4 days later, on April 12, 1975, Josephine Baker died. She had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage, collapsed in her apartment, and never regained consciousness. She died surrounded by newspapers praising her comeback, reviews she had just barely lived to see. The news devastated France and shocked the world. Thousands of people lined the streets for her funeral, and the French government gave her a 21-gun salute, full military honors usually reserved for heads of state. She was buried in Monaco, in the Grimaldi family vault, thanks to Princess Grace's continued support. For decades, that's where the story ended. Josephine Baker was remembered in France, somewhat forgotten in America, her name a footnote in civil rights history despite her groundbreaking work. But in 2021, something remarkable happened. French President Emmanuel Macron announced that Josephine Baker would be inducted into the Pantheon, the mausoleum in Paris, where France's greatest heroes are buried. It was an extraordinary honor. She would be the first black woman, and only the sixth woman ever to be interred there, joining figures like Voltaire, Victor Hugo, and Marie Curie. The ceremony took place on November 30th, 2021, and though her body remained in Monaco, a symbolic cenotaph was placed in the Pantheon. Macron's speech called her a war hero, a resistance fighter, and a tireless advocate for civil rights, finally giving her the recognition she had deserved all along. Josephine Baker lived so many lives in one that it seems impossible one person did all this. She was a dancer, spy, activist, mother, icon, heroine, and revolutionary. She defied racism when the world said she should accept her place, fought Nazis when she could have stayed safe, and created a family that represented everything she believed, that love has no color, border, or limit. Yes, she died in debt, expelled from her dream castle, but she died knowing she had changed the world, that she had proven a poor black girl from St. Louis could conquer Paris, defeat Nazis, and force America to look at its own racism. Her legacy isn't in properties or bank accounts. It's in every child she inspired to dream bigger, in every person she taught to fight, and every time someone dares to be free, even when the world says they can't. She showed that survival itself can be an act of revolution, that taking up space when society wants you invisible is a form of warfare, and that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to be broken by a world designed to break you. Are you enjoying this story about Mahalia Jackson? Then this is the moment to help keep stories like this alive. We're so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers. And your support right now truly makes a difference. Here's something important. 94.8% of the people watching these videos are not subscribed yet. If you're one of them, take just 1 second and subscribe. It's free, it means a lot, and it helps this channel grow so we can keep bringing you the timeless stories of the TV shows and legends we still miss. Let's hit this goal together this year, and don't forget, at the end of the video, there are more stories waiting for you. Thank you for being here. Josephine Baker wasn't just a star, she was a dancing revolution, and revolutions never truly die. They just wait for the next person brave enough to carry them forward.